Dad, this is the worst possible timing, my son whispered into his phone as I lay dying in the rodeo dust. My daughter was live streaming my collapse to her followers, calling it a family tragedy. They left before the ambulance even pulled away. A week later, they showed up at my ranch, with lawyers demanding access to my accounts. They thought the old man was broken powerless. But I had spent 50 years building more than just a business. I had built connections they never knew existed. They wanted my money so badly they forgot to check if I was actually as helpless as I looked. That was their first mistake. It wouldn't be their last. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you are listening in the comments. The roar of the crowd was a physical thing, a wave of heat and sound that washed over the arena. It smelled of dirt, sweat, and grilled onions from the concession stands. For 50 years, that smell had been home. I stood behind the chutes, the rough wood of the fence digging into my palms, and watched a young cowboy get thrown from a bull. He hit the ground hard, but bounced right back up. That was the way of things here in Montana. You get thrown, you get back up. And now the announcer's voice boomed, crackling through the old speakers, a man who needs no introduction. The founder of this very rodeo, a legend whose saddles have been under the best riders in the country for half a century. Give it up for Jedediah Stone. I took a slow breath, my old knees protesting as I climbed the steps to the platform in the center of the arena. My best friend Grizz gave me a solid pat on the back. "Don't get all emotional up there, old man," he grumbled, but I saw the pride in his eyes. I just nodded, my gaze scanning the crowd, looking for the two faces that should have been in the front row. They were there, but off to the side near the corporate sponsor tents. My son Corbin was in a suit that cost more than my first truck, talking animatedly into his phone. My daughter Beatrice was adjusting the filter on a picture she'd just taken her back to the arena. They looked like porcelain dolls set down in a world of leather and dust. They were my children, but they weren't of this place anymore. "Jed, on behalf of the whole county, thank you," the mayor said, shaking my hand and pushing a heavy, polished plaque into my arms. "For your service, your craft, and your legacy." Legacy. The word echoed in my ears. I looked from the plaque to my children. Corbin glanced up, gave a tight, impatient smile, and then looked back at his phone. Bea was laughing at something someone had commented on her post. A sharp, unfamiliar pain shot through my chest, a pain that had nothing to do with my aging bones. It was the pain of being a ghost at your own celebration. I opened my mouth to say thanks, to tell the crowd they were my family. But the words wouldn't come. The roar of the crowd began to fade, replaced by a dull ringing in my ears. The bright afternoon sun blurred into a blinding white light. My hand, the one that had tooled 1,000 saddles, lost its grip. The plaque slipped its corner, hitting the wooden platform with a sickening crack. Then my knees gave way, and the whole world went dark. Darkness wasn't absolute. It was a thick, heavy blanket pricked with needles of sound. Shouts, the scrape of boots on wood, a woman's gasp. I was floating in that darkness, a ship cut loose from its moorings. My body was a distant thing, a heavy sack of bones someone else was dealing with. Hands were on me, rough and urgent. They rolled me onto my back. The white light I'd seen earlier returned, filtered through my eyelids. I tasted something metallic in my mouth, like an old penny. Was this it? Was this the end of the line? Then voices cut through the fog. Sharp, familiar. "This is an absolute disaster," Corbin's voice tight with frustration. "Thompson is right there, Dad. This is the worst possible timing." The words weren't laced with worry for me, but with anger at the inconvenience. My son, the investor, was calculating the damage to his reputation. A siren began to wail in the distance, a long, mournful cry that seemed to be pulling me away. Another voice joined the first, higher, sharper. "Beatrice, my phone is blowing up." Everyone saw. A pause, then a sigh that scraped me raw. "Well, I suppose we'll have to cancel the caterers." Cancel the caterers. The words hit me harder than the fall. My heart, the one that was failing inside my chest, seemed to seize. I was a problem to be managed, an event to be rescheduled. Not a father, not a man fighting for his life. A deeper voice, a low growl I'd known for 50 years, cut through their chatter. "Grizz, get out of the way. Give him some damn air." There was a shuffling sound, the protest of my children being pushed aside. I felt a familiar calloused hand on my forehead, a small island of loyalty in an ocean of indifference. The world tilted as they lifted me onto a gurney. For a second my eyes fluttered open. The scene was a blurry nightmare. Paramedics' faces grim. The worried eyes of my neighbors. And beyond them, standing by the sponsor tent, were Corbin and Beatrice. They weren't watching me. They were arguing with each other, their faces pinched and ugly. As the ambulance doors slammed shut, the last thing I heard was Grizz's voice, not speaking to me but to them. His words were low, but they carried like a rifle shot across the plains. You should be ashamed. The siren screamed, and the darkness finally took me completely. It was a relief. It was quieter in the dark than it was with my own children. The first thing I was aware of was the beeping. A steady, rhythmic pulse that was neither fast nor slow. It was the sound of existence, a metronome counting out the seconds I was still on this earth. The second thing was the smell. Antiseptic, clean, and sharp, a smell so alien it made the memories of rodeo dust feel like a dream. My eyelids were heavy, glued shut. I forced them open. The light was merciless, a cold fluorescent glare from a panel on the ceiling. I blinked, letting the room come into focus. White walls. A metal rail beside me, cool and impersonal. A tube was taped to the back of my hand, snaking its way up to a clear bag of fluid hanging from a pole. A hospital. A wave of relief washed over me so strong it almost felt like joy. I was alive. The thought was simple, basic. I had survived. My next thought followed right on its heels. My kids. They must be worried sick. I tried to push myself up, a grunt escaping my lips. A sharp pain in my chest pushed me back down onto the scratchy sheets. I winced my body, reminding me it was a fragile, broken thing. I settled for turning my head, my neck stiff. My eyes searched the small room, looking for the familiar shape of my son, the anxious fidgeting of my daughter. The room was empty. There was a chair in the corner, a cheap vinyl thing colored a sad shade of blue. It was vacant. No coat was draped over its back. No purse sat on its seat. It was just an empty chair in an empty room, a silent testament to an absence that screamed louder than any rodeo crowd. Maybe they had just stepped out for coffee. Maybe they were talking to the doctor. Excuses formed in my mind, flimsy things I tried to use to patch the growing hole in my chest. I stared at the door, willing it to open. I listened for their footsteps, their voices. The only sounds were the steady beep of the monitor and the faint hum of the building's ventilation. The clock on the wall ticked each second, dropping into the silence like a stone in a deep well. 10 minutes, 30, an hour. The excuses wore thin, then crumbled into dust. They weren't coming. They hadn't come. The truth was as cold and sterile as the room itself. The pain in my chest flared again, but this time I knew it wasn't from my heart. It was from the space where a heart was supposed to be. Just as I closed my eyes, a new sound. The slow, heavy squeak of work boots on linoleum. The door handle turned with a soft click. It swung inward, and I held my breath. It wasn't Corbin. It wasn't Beatrice. It was Cody Grismiller. He filled the doorway, a mountain of a man in worn denim and scuffed boots, his face a road map of wrinkles carved by 70 Montana winters. He looked completely out of place, a piece of the wilderness dropped into this sterile white box. He held his dusty cowboy hat in his hands, turning the brim over and over. "Grizz," I rasped. My voice sounded like gravel scraping rock. He walked over his heavy boots, silent on the linoleum, and pulled the sad vinyl chair closer to my bed. He didn't offer empty platitudes or tell me I looked good. Grizz had never lied to me in his life, and he wasn't about to start now. He just sat his presence, a solid grounding weight in the flimsy room. "How you feelin', Jed?" he asked, his voice a low rumble. "Like I got kicked by a mule," I said. I tried to shift, and the pain in my chest answered with a hot poker. "Where are they, Grizz Corbin and B?" He didn't look away. His clear blue eyes met mine, and in them I saw the truth I'd been trying to deny. They left Jed. They left before the ambulance even pulled out of the parking lot. The words hung in the air between us, cold and sharp. I thought of Beatrice's sigh, the mention of caterers. It wasn't just my imagination. It was real. "They say anything," I whispered, my throat tight. Corbin was on the phone with some investor from Denver. Grizz said, his voice flat, reporting facts. Worried about the optics of the situation. Beatrice, she was live streaming, talking about a family tragedy to her followers. My fingers curled into a fist, the thin hospital blanket crinkling under the pressure. It was worse than I thought. My collapse wasn't a crisis to them. It was a business complication. It was content. I stared at the ceiling, the white panels blurring. The beeping of the monitor seemed to mock me. "Grizz," I said, my voice barely audible. "Tell me straight." He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. The kindness was gone from his face, replaced by a hard protective anger. "I'm your friend, Jed, not theirs. You need to know." He paused, his gaze unwavering. "That's not all. The bank called me. I'm still listed as an emergency contact on some of your accounts." I waited, a cold dread seeping into my veins, colder than any hospital chill. "Someone's been making inquiries about your assets, Jed. Big ones. asking about power of attorney, about the ranch's deeds, about the business accounts. The bank wouldn't tell them anything, but they knew who it was. He let the silence stretch, letting the weight of his next words land with full force. It was Corbin. The words settled in the quiet room heavier than any tombstone. It was Corbin. My son, my own blood. Grizz said nothing more. He just sat there, a silent, weathered rock, letting me absorb the blow. For a long moment, I felt nothing. It was a strange hollow numbness, like the dead of a Montana winter when the world is frozen so deep you forget what warmth feels like. My mind replayed Grizz's words, but they were just sounds empty of meaning. It was too monstrous to comprehend. Then the numbness cracked. A pain unlike any I'd ever known ripped through me. It wasn't the sharp fire of the heart attack. It was a slow, grinding agony, like a canyon being carved out of my soul. They hadn't just left me to die. They were actively burying me. Shoveling dirt on my face while I was still breathing, a memory flashed behind my eyes so clear it felt like yesterday. Corbin, barely 20, standing in my workshop with a busted-up car and a story about bad luck. I'd worked 3 straight nights, my hands raw, to finish a custom saddle for a wealthy client. I used the money not to fix my leaky roof, but to pay off his debt without his mother ever knowing. He had hugged me, his eyes full of promises. "I'll make you proud, Dad. Proud." The word was ash in my mouth. I looked at my hands, resting pale and still on the white hospital blanket. These hands had built a life from nothing. They had provided for a family, built a business on a foundation of honor and a man's word. And for what? To fund a lifestyle for 2 people who saw me as nothing more than a bank account with a failing heart. The beeping of the monitor continued its steady rhythm. Beep, beep, beep. Each one was a hammer blow forging something new inside me. The grief, the shock, the heartbreak, they were being burned away. And in their place something cold and hard was taking shape. Ice, steel. The man who had loved his children unconditionally was dying in this hospital bed. But another man was being born. A man who understood the world for what it was. A world where you protect what is yours, where you answer betrayal, not with tears, but with fire. I slowly turned my head to look at Grizz. He was watching me, his expression unreadable, but his eyes knowing. He had seen the change. The fire had been lit. My voice, when I finally spoke, was quiet. It was steady. It was a voice he hadn't heard in years, the voice of Jedediah Stone before the world had softened him. "Hand me my phone." Grizz moved without a word. He pulled my battered smartphone from the pocket of his denim jacket and placed it in my hand. The device felt heavy, foreign, its cracked screen a spiderweb of past carelessness. But in that moment it felt like a weapon. My thumb, no longer trembling, moved with a purpose it hadn't had in days. I scrolled through my contacts. I saw Corbin's name, then Beatrice's listed, one after the other. There was no pang of sadness, no flicker of hesitation. They were just names on a list like strangers. I kept scrolling until I found the one I needed, Marcus Thorne. My lawyer for 40 years, a man as tough and unyielding as a Montana winter. I pressed the call button. The phone rang twice before he picked up. "Jedediah, I heard what happened." "My God, man, are you all right?" His voice was a familiar baritone, laced with genuine concern. "I'm alive, Marcus," I said, my voice flat, cutting through his pleasantries, "and I don't have time for small talk." There was a brief silence on the other end, then the rustle of papers. The tone of a professional taking over. "Of course. What do you need?" "I need you to pull the primary trust documents for the family estate," I said, my eyes fixed on the blank white wall across from me. "Specifically, I want you to look at Section 4, subsection B. The honor clause." The silence on the other end was longer this time. I could almost hear the gears turning in his sharp legal mind. "The honor clause," he repeated slowly. "Jed, you know what that does. That's a nuclear option. It was written as a deterrent, a worst-case scenario. This is the worst-case scenario," I replied, my voice as cold as the metal bedrail under my hand. "My children have failed to act with the honor and integrity required of them as beneficiaries. They have brought shame upon the family name." "Is that not the language we used, Marcus?" "It's more or less the language, yes," he conceded, sounding stunned. "Good. I want to invoke it. Immediately. I want their access to the trust funds frozen. Not suspended. Frozen. I want it done before they even know what's hit them. Jed, this will start a war," he warned, his voice low. A grim smile touched my lips for the first time in days. "I know," I said, "and I'm the one firing the first shot. Get it done, Marcus." I ended the call before he could argue further. The phone clicked softly as I placed it back on the bedside table. The room was quiet again, but the silence felt different now. It was charged electric. It was the silence before a storm. Grizz, who had stood by the window the entire time, turned to look at me. He didn't say a word. He just gave a slow, deliberate nod. His eyes, for the first time since I'd woken up, held a glimmer of something that wasn't pity. It was respect. The respectful nod from Grizz was all the confirmation I needed. I wasn't just a bitter old man lashing out. I was a general on a battlefield of my own making, and my oldest friend was my most trusted soldier. But freezing the trust was just the opening salvo. It wasn't the whole war. That's just the main artery, Grizz, I said, my thumb already moving across the phone's screen again. Now we cut off the smaller veins. He pulled the vinyl chair back to the bedside, leaning in. What's next? Corbin's tech startup in Denver. The one he calls a disruptor. I'm the sole investor. My monthly wire transfer is the only thing keeping its lights on. That stops today. My fingers found the number for my bank manager. And Beatrice's art gallery, the one she uses to rub elbows with the city folk. The lease is in my name. The inventory was purchased on my credit. She's living on my dime, pretending it's her own genius. You're gonna pull the plug on both of them, Grizz asked, though there was no surprise in his voice. I'm not just pulling the plug. I'm taking the whole damn wall socket with me, I said. But that's my job. I need something from you. Name it. My eyes met his. They're going to retaliate. They're stupid, but they're not completely powerless. They'll hire their own lawyers. They'll start making noise, trying to get me declared incompetent. They'll play dirty. I took a breath, the air stinging my lungs. I need ears on the ground. I need to know what they're planning before they do it. Who they're talking to. What lawyers they hire. I want to know everything. Grizz's weathered face broke into a grim smile. Jed, half the people in this valley owe you a favor. The other half just plain respect you. Corbin and Bee, they're outsiders now. They'll never see the old ranch hands and waitresses coming. He stood up, placing his hat back on his head. Consider it done. I'll make some calls. You just focus on getting that heart of yours back in fighting shape. It's already there, old friend, I said, my gaze dropping back to my phone. It's pumping ice now. He gave another nod and walked out, leaving me alone with the beeping monitor again. But this time it didn't sound like a countdown to the end. It sounded like the timer on a bomb, and my finger was on the button. The bomb didn't take long to detonate. Less than 24 hours. My phone buzzed on the bedside table, the screen lighting up with Corbin's name. I let it ring 3 times, a small, cold smile playing on my lips. Then I answered, keeping my voice neutral. Hello, Corbin. Dad, thank God. I've been trying to reach you. How are you? We've been so worried. The concern in his voice was thick, syrupy, and utterly fake. It was the voice he used on investors, not his father. I'm still breathing, I said, my tone flat. Which I imagine is a disappointment for you. A beat of stunned silence. What are you talking about, Dad? Cut the act, son, I interrupted, the word son tasting like poison. I know you were more worried about your business partners than your father's pulse. Let's get to the real reason you called. Your allowance has been cut off. The fake concern vanished, replaced by a raw, jagged anger that was far more honest. What the hell did you do? My accounts are frozen. The trust. It's locked down. This has to be a mistake. It's no mistake, I said, my voice as calm as a frozen lake. It's a consequence. You and your sister failed to meet the terms of the agreement. The honor clause has been invoked. The honor clause, he spat the words, dripping with disbelief and contempt. That's some ancient relic you and Grandpa came up with. It's not even legal. My lawyer, Marcus Thorne, seems to think it is. And his opinion is the only one that matters right now. I could hear him pacing, his breath coming in short, angry bursts. You can't do this to me, he yelled, his voice cracking. I have obligations. I have investors who are counting on that capital. You're trying to ruin me. Ruin you. I let out a short, bitter laugh. You're doing a fine job of that all by yourself. I'm just stopping you from dragging my name and my money down with you. Beatrice's voice suddenly cut in on the line, shrill and frantic. She must have been on speaker. Daddy, please, this is insane. We're your children. You owe us. All my brand sponsorships depend on a certain lifestyle. You owe us. The 3 words that summed up their entire existence. The sense of entitlement was so profound, so absolute, it was almost impressive. I owed you an education. I owed you a roof over your head when you were young. I owed you a chance to make something of yourselves, I said, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous growl. I paid those debts in full many times over. Now you owe me. You owe me the respect you failed to show when you left me for dead on that stage. This isn't over, Corbin snarled back on the line. You think you're so tough, old man. We'll see you in court. I look forward to it, I said, and hung up. The threat of a lawsuit didn't bother me. It was the predictable move of a cornered animal. What interested me was how they would fight. I spent the next day in the quiet of my room, not resting but planning. I filled a notepad with strategies, contingencies, and the names of people I could trust. By the time Grizz walked in the following afternoon, I was ready. He didn't bother with greetings. He pulled the vinyl chair up to my bed, his face grim. "They've made their first move," he said, his voice low. "I figured as much," I replied, setting my notepad aside. "Who'd they hire? A real snake. Fella out of Billings named Lawrence Black. Specializes in elder law." Grizz practically spat the words. "His whole business is helping greedy kids pry estates away from their parents. He's got a reputation for being nasty." I nodded slowly. It made sense. Corbin wouldn't hire a fighter. He'd hire a butcher. And what's their angle of attack? Grizz leaned closer, his voice dropping even lower. "He's filing a petition for an emergency competency hearing. They're going to argue that your heart attack caused brain damage, that you're not in your right mind. They're going to say I'm manipulating you for my own gain." He clenched his massive fists. "They're painting you as a confused old man and me as a predator." I looked at my old friend, at the raw anger in his eyes on my behalf. A lesser man would have been intimidated, worried about his own reputation. But Grizz was solid oak. "Let them try," I said, my voice calm. "They'll find I'm more clear-headed than I've been in 20 years. "They're not stopping there," Jed Grizz continued, frustration creeping into his tone. "They're contacting your doctors, trying to get access to your medical records. They're even calling up ranch hands' old employees, trying to find anyone who will testify that you've been forgetful or erratic lately. They were trying to build a narrative, a story where I was the senile fool and they were the dutiful children trying to protect me from myself. It was a cowardly, disgusting strategy, and it was exactly what I expected." "Good," I said. Grizz stared at me, his brow furrowed in confusion. "Good, Jed. What in the hell is good about any of this?" A cold, hard smile formed on my face. "It's good because they're showing their whole hand," I explained, tapping the notepad beside me. "They think they're setting a trap for me. But they're the ones walking right into mine." Grizz's confusion was written all over his face. He sank back into the chair, shaking his head. "A trap, Jed. They're the ones with the high-priced lawyer. We're on the defense here." "That's what they think," I said, leaning forward slightly, the energy in my veins feeling sharp and clean. "Marcus and I talked about this possibility years ago. It's why the honor clause is so airtight. But this competency hearing, this is a gift. A gift. Think about it, Grizz. To prove I'm incompetent, what do they have to do? I didn't wait for an answer. They have to bring my life, my business, my entire legacy into a courtroom. They have to put my character on trial in front of a judge." A slow understanding began to dawn in Grizz's eyes. "And they think they can find people to speak against you." "Exactly," I confirmed. "They'll go to the ranch hands I had to let go over the years. They'll find disgruntled suppliers. They'll try to dig up dirt. And you know what they'll find?" I paused for effect. "Nothing. Just a long line of people who will testify that Jedediah Stone's word is his bond." I picked up the notepad again, flipping to a clean page. "But we're not just going to defend. We're going to attack. You said they were contacting my doctors, trying to," Grizz confirmed. "But HIPAA laws are on your side. They can't get anything without your consent." "I'm not going to give them my consent," I said, a cold smile forming. "I'm going to offer it. I'll volunteer to undergo a full psychiatric evaluation by a court-appointed doctor. I'll hand over every medical record. I will show them I have nothing to hide." "You're going to walk right into their ambush?" Grizz asked, incredulous. "It's not an ambush if you're the one who baited the trap," I countered. "While they're busy chasing a ghost, trying to prove I'm crazy, you and I are going to be busy with something else." I started writing on the notepad. "I need a list, Grizz. A list of every single person, every family, every community project this ranch has supported for the last 30 years. The college funds, the medical bills I covered, the church roof, we fixed the rodeo scholarships. I want all of it. Documented. Certified." Grizz's face broke into a wide, fierce grin. He finally understood. "You're not just going to prove you're sane, are you?" "No," I said, underlining a name on the list. "I'm going to prove they're not just greedy. I'm going to prove they're irrelevant." The days that followed blurred into a routine of quiet determination. The hospital staff saw a model patient. I ate what they gave me. I did the breathing exercises. I walked the sterile hallways, my steps growing stronger each day. They saw an old rancher recovering from a heart attack. They had no idea they were witnessing a man reforging himself. My hospital room became a war room. Grizz was my field general, coming in every afternoon with updates. He brought stacks of paper affidavits from old ranch hands, letters from families I'd helped, copies of checks written to the community fund. He spread them out on the small bedside table, and together we built an arsenal of goodwill, a fortress of character that no greedy lawyer could breach. The Millers send their best, Grizz would say, handing me a signed statement. Remember when you co-signed their first cattle loan? They never forgot. Or found the receipts for the new high school football scoreboard. Your name's all over it. Each piece of paper was a brick in the wall I was building around my legacy. My children were trying to prove I was losing my mind. I was preparing to prove I had a heart they could never comprehend. Marcus Thorne, my lawyer, became a constant voice on the phone. We spoke twice a day, dissecting every possible legal angle. He arranged for the psychiatric evaluation. I wasn't worried. My mind felt sharper and clearer than it had in years. The fog of misplaced hope for my children had lifted, leaving behind a hard crystalline clarity. They're getting desperate, Jed Marcus told me one evening. Their lawyer is making a lot of noise, but he has no substance. He's finding out that the people of Sparrow Creek are loyal to a fault. Loyalty is earned, Marcus, I said, looking out the window at the distant mountains. It's not something you can inherit. I was getting stronger. The nurses noted my improved vital signs. The doctors talked about discharge dates, but the real healing wasn't happening in my chest. It was happening in my soul. The part of me that had been weak, that had made endless excuses for Corbin and Beatrice, was being burned away. I was no longer just a father. I was the custodian of a legacy, and I would not let it be tarnished by the greed of those who happened to share my blood. The hearing was set for a week after my release. They thought they would be facing a frail old man broken by sickness and grief. They were in for a surprise. The day they discharged me, the world felt too bright, too loud. After weeks in the hushed white world of the hospital, the crisp Montana air was a shock to my lungs. I walked out of those automatic doors, not in a flimsy gown, but in my own worn denim and leather boots. Grizz was waiting by his truck, the engine rumbling. He didn't fuss. He just took the small bag from my hand and opened the passenger door. The ride back to the ranch was quiet. We passed fields of grazing cattle and distant mountains still capped with snow. It was a world away from the beeping monitors and sterile smells. It was my world. As we turned onto the long gravel road leading to my property, Grizz glanced over. "Main house?" he asked. I shook my head. "Number?" "The workshop." He didn't question it. He steered the truck past the familiar silhouette of the ranch house and parked in front of the large weathered barn that had been the heart of my life's work for 50 years. Jed's fighting back. If you're enjoying his story so far, take a moment to hit that like button to show your support. It truly helps. Now let's see what awaited him inside. Grizz stayed by the truck as I walked to the heavy oak doors. I slid the bolt, and the doors groaned open. The smell hit me first, a rich perfume of leather wood shavings and oil. It was the smell of creation, of honest work, my sanctuary. Dust motes danced in the shafts of light cutting through the high windows. My tools hung on the walls, each in its proper place, their steel surfaces gleaming faintly. Unfinished saddles sat on their stands like patient sculptures. This room held more of my history, more of my soul than any other place on earth. My steps were slow but steady. I ran my hand along a fresh side of steer hide, its texture familiar and comforting. My gaze drifted to the old brick hearth in the corner, the one I'd built with my own father. And there it was, hanging from a simple iron hook. My first branding iron. The one from the hook. I took it down. The iron was heavy in my hand, its weight real and substantial. The simple JS forged into its head felt cool against my palm. This was the mark of my word, the symbol of my promise. A promise of quality, a promise of honor. My children saw it as a relic. I saw it as a reminder of who I was. I held it for a long moment, feeling the cold steel, the perfect balance. The man who had been broken in the rodeo dust was gone. The man holding this iron knew exactly who he was and what he had to do. I turned my resolve as hard and unyielding as the tool in my hand, and walked back out into the sunlight where Grizz was waiting. "All right, old friend," I said, my voice clear and strong. "Let's go to court." The courtroom was smaller than I expected, all dark wood and worn benches. It smelled of old paper and stale coffee. The air was thick with a tension you could cut with a knife. I walked in with Marcus Thorne at my side, my back straight, my steps steady. Across the room I saw them. Corbin was in another one of his expensive suits, whispering urgently to a man with slicked-back hair and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. That had to be Lawrence Black. Beatrice sat beside them, dabbing at her eyes with a silk handkerchief, putting on a show for the judge. She looked like a professional mourner at a funeral for a man who was still very much alive. They didn't look at me. They couldn't. Grizz sat in the front bench behind us, a silent, imposing presence. His being there was a statement in itself. "All rise," the bailiff called out, and Judge Miller, a woman with a no-nonsense face and sharp eyes, entered the room. She sat, adjusted her glasses, and looked down at the paperwork before her. "We are here today to hear the petition filed by Mr. Corbin Stone and Miss Beatrice Stone regarding the competency of their father, Mr. Jedediah Stone," she began, her voice crisp. "Mr. Black, you may begin." Lawrence Black stood up, his movements smooth and practiced. He was a performer. "Your Honor, we are here today, not out of greed, but out of profound concern. My clients love their father deeply, but since his tragic and unfortunate heart attack, Mr. Stone has been unwell. His behavior has become erratic, vindictive, and deeply worrying. He paced in front of the judge's bench. He has, without warning, cut off his children from the family trust they have relied upon. He is making rash, impulsive decisions that threaten to destroy the very legacy he built. We believe he is suffering from diminished capacity and is being unduly influenced by third parties." His eyes flickered toward Grizz for a fraction of a second. "We are simply asking the court to intervene," Black continued, his voice dripping with false sincerity, "to appoint a conservator to protect Mr. Stone from himself and to safeguard the family assets until he is well again." It was a masterful performance. He painted a picture of a tragic, senile old man and two loving children forced to make a difficult choice. My own son and daughter nodded along their faces, masks of feigned sorrow. I felt a cold anger rise in me, but I pushed it down, keeping my expression neutral, just as Marcus had advised. "Mr. Thorne," the judge said, turning her sharp gaze to our table. "Your response," Marcus stood his presence, solid and unassuming compared to Black's showmanship. "Your Honor," he said, his voice calm and clear, "my client, Mr. Jedediah Stone, is not unwell. He is not confused. He is, however, profoundly disappointed." Marcus let the word hang in the air. "The actions he has taken are not erratic. They are the calculated, deliberate, and entirely justified consequences of a deep and painful betrayal. A betrayal my client is now prepared to prove in his own words, and with a mountain of evidence to support them. The defense calls Cody Miller to the stand," Marcus announced, his voice echoing in the quiet room. Grizz stood up from the bench behind me. He moved with the slow, deliberate grace of a man who had spent his life working the land. He wore a clean denim shirt, but he hadn't compromised on his worn leather boots. As he walked to the witness stand, he looked every bit the part of what he was, an honest man. He took the oath, his voice a low, steady rumble, and sat down, his large hands resting on his knees. I watched my children. Corbin shifted in his seat, adjusting his tie. Beatrice stopped her fake crying and whispered something to her lawyer, her eyes narrowing. They saw Grizz not as a witness, but as an obstacle. "Mr. Miller," Marcus began, "how long have you known Jedediah Stone?" "All my life," Grizz replied. "Grew up on the ranch next to his. Over 50 years. And in all that time, would you describe him as a man prone to rash or impulsive decisions?" "No, sir," Grizz said firmly. "Jed's the most deliberate man I've ever known. He thinks about a fence post placement for a week. He doesn't do anything without a damn good reason." Lawrence Black shot up from his chair. "Objection, Your Honor. The witness's opinion is not relevant." "Sustained," the judge said, though her eyes lingered on Grizz with interest. "Stick to the facts, Mr. Thorne." "Of course, Your Honor," Marcus said smoothly. "Mr. Miller, let's talk about the facts of July 4th, the day of Mr. Stone's heart attack." "Where were you when it happened?" "I was standing right next to him on the stage," Grizz said. "I saw the whole thing." "And where were his children, Mr. Corbin Stone and Miss Beatrice Stone, off to the side?" Grizz answered, his gaze flicking to them for a moment, cold as ice. "By the tents. On their phones." "And when their father collapsed, what was their immediate reaction?" Grizz took a slow breath. "They didn't move. Not at first. They just watched. It was the crowd, the paramedics, who rushed to help. When I got to Jed's side, I heard his son Corbin complaining to someone on the phone about bad timing. And I heard his daughter Beatrice sigh and say she'd have to cancel her caterers." A collective gasp rippled through the small gallery of spectators. I saw Corbin's face flush a dark red. Beatrice looked down at her hands, her mask of sorrow cracking. The truth, spoken in Grizz's plain, unvarnished words, was a sledgehammer to their carefully constructed house of lies. Black was on his feet again, his voice sharp. "Objection, hearsay." "The witness is twisting my client's words." "Overruled, Mr. Black," the judge said, her voice stern. She looked at Grizz. "The court will hear it." "Continue, Mr. Miller." Marcus let Grizz's testimony settle in the stunned silence of the room, then nodded to the judge. No further questions for this witness, Your Honor. Lawrence Black practically sprang from his chair, his slick smile back in place. He approached the witness stand like a predator circling its prey. It was the snake facing the old oak. Mr. Miller Black, began his voice smooth as silk. You've been friends with Mr. Stone for a very long time, isn't that correct? That's right, Grizz said, his voice even. You've worked for him on and off for most of your life. We've worked together. Never for him, Grizz corrected a subtle but important distinction. Black's smile tightened. Of course. Let's be clear, Mr. Miller. You stand to gain if Mr. Stone's children are disinherited, don't you? Perhaps a bigger piece of the pie for yourself. Marcus shot to his feet. Objection, counsel, is badgering the witness and making baseless accusations. Sustained, the judge warned. Tread carefully, Mr. Black. Black gave a slight bow. My apologies. Let's try another angle. You testified that you heard my client say certain things in a moment of chaos and distress. Is it possible with all the noise and confusion that you simply misheard them? No, Grizz said, his voice unwavering. I heard them clear as a bell. But you're not a young man, are you, mister? Miller Black pressed his voice laced with condescension. Hearing can fade with age. Memories can become unreliable. Grizz didn't rise to the bait. He just sat there, his gaze steady. My hearing is fine, and my memory is long. I remember when Jedediah bailed Corbin out of his first gambling debt in college. I remember when he paid for Beatrice's first 2 weddings. I remember every time he put his own needs aside for them. The air in the room crackled with tension. I saw Beatrice flinch at the mention of her weddings. Black was losing control, and he knew it. He changed tactics again, his voice becoming sharp. Mr. Miller, isn't it true that you hold a personal grudge against Mr. Stone's children? That you've openly called them spoiled and ungrateful? Yes, Grizz said, without a moment's hesitation. The admission seemed to catch Black off guard. He had expected a denial, a defensive reaction. He quickly tried to recover. So, you admit your testimony is biased. You're here to slander them, not to tell the truth. Grizz leaned forward slightly, his voice dropping, but it carried to every corner of the room. I call them what they are. That's not bias, counselor. That's just an honest assessment of character. He paused, his eyes locking on to Black's. And I'm not the only one who thinks so. Is that a threat? Mr. Miller Black hissed. No, Grizz replied, his voice calm and powerful. It's a fact. And if you keep asking questions, you'll find there's a whole valley full of people lined up behind me, ready to say the same damn thing. Lawrence Black stumbled back to his table, his face pale. The snake had been charmed not by a flute, but by the blunt force of honesty. Grizz stepped down from the stand, shot me a look of pure, unshakable loyalty, and returned to his seat. The room was utterly silent. The defense calls Jedediah, Stone Marcus said into the quiet. I stood up. My knees felt strong. My chest didn't ache. I walked to the stand, my boots making no sound on the worn carpet. I didn't look at my children. I looked at the judge. I swore the oath, my voice clear and steady, and sat down. Marcus approached. He didn't ask me about my health or my state of mind. He asked me one simple question. Mr. Stone, can you please tell the court why you invoked the honor clause? I took a breath and looked directly at Judge Miller. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. Your Honor, I was raised to believe that a man's name is the most valuable thing he owns. It's not the land, not the money. It's his word, his reputation, his legacy. I spent my life building that legacy not just for myself, but for my children. My gaze finally shifted, sweeping over Corbin and Beatrice. They flinched, unable to meet my eyes. I gave them every advantage. The best schools. Businesses to run. 2nd, 3rd, and 4th chances. All I asked in return was that they live with a shred of the honor this family was built on. I turned back to the judge. When I collapsed on that stage in front of the whole town, my life was in the balance. And my children. My children saw an inconvenience. They saw a business problem. They saw a social media opportunity. They did not see their father. The courtroom was so still you could hear a pin drop. The decisions I have made since that day have not been impulsive. They have been the most deliberate decisions of my life. A legacy is not a treasure chest you hand over to those who are unworthy. It's a fire you pass on to those who will keep it burning. My children tried to snuff out that fire. So I have decided to find someone who won't. I stopped speaking. I had said what needed to be said. Lawrence Black, seeing his case crumbling, scrambled to his feet. "Your Honor, this is nothing but the rambling of a bitter, vengeful old man, Mr. Black," I said, my voice cutting through his, my eyes locked on his. I didn't wait for the judge's permission. "You are correct on one point. I am bitter. You would be too if your own flesh and blood valued your bank account more than your heartbeat. But I am not vengeful." I leaned forward slightly. "I am a craftsman, and I am simply tearing down a structure that has proven to be rotten to its very foundation." My final words landed in the silent courtroom and stayed there hanging in the air like smoke. Lawrence Black stood frozen, his mouth slightly agape. He had no counter-argument. There was nothing left to say. My children wouldn't look at me. They stared at the dark wood of their table as if it held the answers to their sudden catastrophic ruin. Judge Miller looked at me for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then she looked at my children. Finally, she took off her glasses, placing them deliberately on the bench in front of her. The small, neat pile of evidence Marcus had submitted, the psychiatric evaluation, confirming my soundness of mind, the dozens of affidavits from the community, she didn't even glance at it. My testimony had been enough. "Mr. Black," she said, her voice devoid of any warmth, "do you have any further questions for this witness?" Black seemed to shrink inside his expensive suit. No, Your Honor. No further questions." "Very well," she said. "Mr. Stone, you may step down." I walked back to my table, each step feeling lighter than the last. I sat beside Marcus, who gave my shoulder a firm squeeze. I didn't need to look at Grizz to know he was grinning behind me. Judge Miller surveyed the room, her gaze sharp and assessing. "I have heard the petition brought forth by Mr. Corbin Stone and Miss Beatrice Stone. I have heard the testimony of Mr. Cody Miller. And I have heard the testimony of Mr. Jedediah Stone himself." She paused, letting the weight of her authority settle. "This court finds the petition for a competency hearing to be utterly without merit. It is not just unsubstantiated. It is a frivolous and deeply cynical abuse of the legal process." I saw Corbin flinch as if he'd been struck. Beatrice let out a small, choked sob. "The evidence is overwhelming that Mr. Jedediah Stone is of sound mind and body, and is fully unequivocally competent to manage his own affairs." The judge continued, her voice rising with indignation. "Furthermore, this court finds the actions of the petitioners to be motivated not by concern but by pure, unadulterated greed." Her gavel hit the block with a crack that echoed like a gunshot. "Petition denied. This hearing is adjourned." It was over. Just like that. The gavel fell, and my children's world fell with it. Black was already stuffing papers into his briefcase, avoiding eye contact with his clients. Corbin sat stunned, his face the color of ash. Beatrice was openly weeping now, not tears of sorrow, but tears of frustrated rage. I stood up, feeling taller than I had in years. As we walked out, I passed their table. For a fleeting second, my eyes met Corbin's remorse. In them, I saw no remorse, no apology, only a raw, impotent hatred. The brand I had spoken of had been permanently seared into him. He had lost, and he knew it. The drive back to Sparrow Creek was as quiet as the ride to the hospital had been weeks ago, but this silence was different. It wasn't heavy with unspoken grief. It was light with relief, clean with the taste of justice served. Grizz pulled his truck to a stop in front of my house, the setting sun painting the mountains in hues of orange and purple. "You want me to stay for a bit?" he asked, his hand on the door handle. I shook my head, offering him a genuine smile for the first time in what felt like a lifetime. "No, old friend. You've done more than enough. Go home to your wife. I've got some thinking to do." He nodded, a look of deep satisfaction on his face. "You fought the good fight, Jed. You won." "We won," I corrected him. He just tipped his hat and drove off his taillights, disappearing down the long gravel road. I stood on my porch for a long time, just breathing. The air smelled of hay and pine and damp earth. This was my legacy, not the numbers in a bank account, but this land, this sky, this silence. The victory in court felt hollow. It wasn't a victory, really. It was just the end of a sickness. I had cut out the rot, and now the real work of healing, of building something new, could begin. I walked inside the familiar comfort of my home, wrapping around me. I went to my office, the room where I'd signed the checks that funded my children's greed, and I sat down behind my old oak desk. My fingers brushed across the worn leather of the blotter. I had proven I was competent. I had protected my assets. But for what? To sit on a pile of money until I died, leaving it to strangers. That wasn't a legacy. It was just an ending. And I wasn't interested in endings anymore. I was interested in beginnings. I thought about the young men and women who came back from overseas, their minds and bodies scarred, looking for a place to belong, a purpose to hold on to. I thought about the quiet dignity of working with your hands, of creating something beautiful and strong out of raw leather and steel. I thought about what this ranch, this valley had given me. A second chance. A place to heal. I picked up the phone and dialed Marcus Thorne one last time. "Jed, congratulations again," he said, his voice warm. "We crushed them." "We did, Marcus," I agreed. "But there's one last piece of business. I need you to draw up some new papers. I'm not revising the will. I'm replacing it." Replacing it with what he asked, a note of curiosity in his voice. "I'm establishing a foundation," I said, looking out the window as the first stars began to appear in the twilight sky. "The Stone Miller Foundation for Veterans. I'm donating the ranch, the workshop, the business, all of it. It's going to be a place where former service members can come to learn a trade, to work the land, to find their peace again." There was a long, respectful silence on the other end of the line. Jed Marcus finally said, his voice thick with emotion, "That's quite a legacy." "No, Marcus," I corrected him gently. "It's a beginning." 6 months later, the sunrise over the Sparrow Creek Valley felt different. It wasn't just another day dawning. It was a promise being fulfilled. I sat on my porch, a thick ceramic mug of coffee, warming my hands, and watched the ranch come to life. The silence I had once cherished was gone, replaced by something far better. The sound of a hammer striking leather echoed from the workshop, but it wasn't just my hammer anymore. The murmur of quiet conversation drifted from the bunkhouse we had renovated. The smell of bacon and coffee wafted from the communal kitchen, where Grizz was undoubtedly holding court, telling old war stories. This wasn't just my ranch now. It was a home. The first group of veterans had arrived 2 months ago. They were men and women of all ages, all branches, carrying burdens I could only guess at. We didn't offer them therapy in the traditional sense. We offered them a purpose. We taught them how to tool leather, how to read the grain of a piece of oak, how to gentle a horse. We gave them the quiet dignity of a hard day's work. A young woman named Maria, a former Marine, was already becoming a master saddle maker. Her hands, once trained for combat, now moved with an artist's grace. I saw in her the same fire, the same passion for the craft that had driven me my whole life. The legacy was safe. It was burning brighter than ever. As for my children, I rarely thought of them. I heard through the grapevine that Corbin's tech startup had imploded spectacularly once my funding dried up. He'd sold his fancy Denver condo and disappeared under a mountain of debt. Beatrice's blog, without the constant infusion of my cash for her lavish lifestyle, faded into obscurity. They had become irrelevant, just as I had planned. There was no triumph in it, only a quiet final sadness for the people they might have been. They had chosen their path. I had chosen mine. Grizz emerged from the kitchen and handed me a fresh cup of coffee. He sat in the rocking chair beside me, a comfortable silence settling between us. We watched as a few of the vets began their morning chores, their movements purposeful, their laughter genuine. "You built something good here," Jed Grizz said, his voice content. "No, old friend," I replied, taking a sip of the hot coffee. "We did." The sun climbed higher, chasing the last of the shadows from the valley. This was my brand now, not the JS seared onto cattle hide, but the brand of hope seared into the lives of those who had given so much. It was a brand of honor, and it would last. I often sit on this porch as the sun goes down, holding that first branding iron in my lap. It feels different now, not cold, not heavy. It feels warm, alive with purpose. For years, I thought my legacy was something I would leave behind: a ranch, a business, a name. I was wrong. A legacy isn't what you leave for people. It's what you leave inside people. The betrayal of my children was the deepest cut of my life. It was a fire that threatened to burn me down to the foundations. But fire doesn't just destroy, it also forges. It burned away my pride, my naivety, and the foolish hope that you can make someone love you. It left behind something stronger, something truer. I don't hate them anymore. Hate is a heavy burden, and my shoulders are finally light. I pity them. They are adrift in a world without honor, without purpose, chasing shadows of wealth they will never catch. Their punishment is not the loss of my money. It is the emptiness of their own lives. The real brand, the true mark of a man, isn't seared onto the skin of an animal. It's the impression you leave on the hearts of others. It's the quiet strength you lend to those who are struggling. It's the hope you build where there was none before. That is a brand that can never be broken, never be stolen, and will never fade away. What a journey we've shared today. Stories like Jedediah's remind us that our true worth is measured by the lives we touch, not the wealth we accumulate. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.